I think Steven was very nervous going into this project. I think any director would be. And he needed to know that he had it right. He needed to know, first of all, what his own point of view was on the story.
Working on the movie for 8 years, I assembled every book and documentary on the subject that I could find, including all the news footage. And then we went to work on the script for the next year and a half. And then eventually Tony Kushner came on at the end of last year.
And once we got Tony Kushner involved, I think Steven really felt that he was in a partnership with somebody who so deeply understood the complexity of these issues that we were on our way to having a screenplay that he felt comfortable shooting.
The only film I've made before this was Angels in America, the Mike Nichols film of my stage play. And I think of myself as a playwright, not as a screenwriter. And my agent called up and said, you know, Kathy Kennedy is in town, and said, would you like to have breakfast with her? And then she said, and we're working on this thing about the Munich Olympics massacre. And then she started to talk about what they were actually making, that it was really not the story of the massacre itself, but the aftermath, and this very murky, problematic, complicated story about the policy of targeted assassination. And I became very interested.
Tony has such a clear feeling about what happened in '72, and he has so many, he reads everything, and he's just one of the most well-read authors I've ever experienced working with. So I had an amazing time just listening to Tony and learning from him and reading a lot of source books that I never read when I first got involved in this project when it was called Vengeance. There was a lot of reading that I hadn't done, and Tony turned me on to so many authors and philosophers and people on all sides of the political and cultural spectrum. And I got a real wonderful education about things that, as a Jew and as someone who is very, very concerned with that region, only thought that I knew about. And then Tony sort of, gave me a total immersion into the politics and policies with a point of view coming from both sides, not just one side.
I was very inspired by the fact that Steven would be willing to put himself in that position to try that. And I saw how deeply he responded to the subject matter and how hard he worked on the script to try to make it as good as possible and as deep and as thoughtful about all the positions that are involved in this.
11 names.
Give us the order and we begin.
It is the story of a mission. It's a mission that wasn't acknowledged initially when it happened in 1972. Golda Meir pulled together a number of government officials and members of the Mossad, and they decided to put together a list of people that they felt were responsible for what had happened in Munich. And they made the decision to try to go after those people.
We're told it was a committee of 10 people decided to sort of try and sentence to death as many as 11, possibly more, possibly less, but it's probably around 11 Palestinian men. Some of the people that were targeted were definitely part of a terror network, and some of the people that were targeted were political leaders, intellectual leaders.
Forget peace for now. We have to show them we're strong.
The idea was to call attention to the world, that Israel would not allow this to happen. And the mission she sends them on, it's almost an eye for an eye. It was an enormous thing to do because it could bring so much bad feeling towards Israel. But good or bad, she didn't pass the buck. She took the responsibility on her own shoulders. Very courageous.
I've made a decision. The responsibility is entirely mine.
It was very clear from the beginning is that our main dramatic agents are 5 guys who are assassinating people. They have to be plausible as guys who are working for an intelligence agency, who are field operatives for an intelligence agency. So we had to figure out why guys who weren't sociopaths were doing this job, why these guys, why guys who would be vulnerable to the kind of moral doubts that one would have, and how to treat that subject without falling into all the obvious cliches of the hitman, his doubts.
It's strange, isn't it, to think of oneself as an assassin?
Think of yourself as something else then.
And these 5 guys are all very different, with different ages, different backgrounds, therefore different upbringings. Some have been brought up in Europe, some have been brought up in Israel, and they've been selected for their different qualities.
Kieran Hines plays Carl. His job is cleanup, After an assassination, he picks up shell casings. He gives misinformation to the first on-scene police and reporters, so it's never traced back to this team.
I never thought you'd last. Carl has some kind of moral imperative about are they actually doing the right thing. He wants to be meticulous about the work that they have to do. And therefore, in that case, he wants to be absolutely specific that the targets are clean and that there's no collateral damage. Nobody innocent gets hurt. So sometimes there are dilemmas.
Do you have any idea how many laws we've broken?
It's time to stop your agonizing. It's counterproductive.
And then we have Hans Zitzler, who plays Hans. And Hans is in charge of getting our team across borders through his skills at forging documents.
You might say it's like a quintet, a musical quintet. They are very, very sharply defined characters in themselves, what they do, what their faculties are, what their possibilities are, and what sometimes their hesitations look like. They have different ways of speaking, of behaving, but they know they are forged together, they are composed together. That's what I see.
Steve, played by Daniel Craig, is kind of our getaway car driver. He takes care of all the transportation to move our people around.
Unless we learn to act like them, we will never defeat them.
Steve, at first, is very gung-ho. And the way he deals with life is that you go like a bull in a china shop. You go head first, and that's, damn the consequences. I just don't think he expects the emotional turmoil that he starts feeling as the movie progresses. And that's kind of really what interested me so much about doing it, because he's flawed, and I kind of like playing flawed characters.
Why did you put a firecracker in that fun?
Because I didn't want to blow up the building.
Matthew Kezovitz plays Robert, and he's someone who is in charge of assembling the bombs.
Robert is not a trained killer. He's more of somebody who committed to the cause of Israel and who was ready to fight for his land. And I was blown away by the script. It's a totally intelligent movie about hatred and vengeance. There is no glory or outcome, just pure destruction. And the movie is a living thing. Every day, something new came up. Every day, Steven had more inspiration and started to bring more ideas to the film and understand himself what the picture was starting to look like. And it was amazing to see the process. And it all came so naturally and so fast. It was amazing.
And the leader of the team, of course, is played by Eric Bana. He plays Avner.
So why'd they make you team leader?
Because he really knows how to cook a brisket.
Avner doesn't really know why he's been chosen and doesn't really know what his specific skill set is that he's meant to be offering the group, other than the fact that for some reason he was chosen as the leader.
Why me?
So what's wrong with you?
I'm not an experienced field operative. So I'm not known.
Not even I know you now.
And I think that is intimidating for him. I think it's a really great thing for the character and for the audience that we really know why the others were chosen. But really, why was Avner chosen to lead those 5 men? And why, in fact, was he chosen to be a part of the mission?
I saw Eric Bana as Avner, funny enough, when I saw The Incredible Hulk with my kids, because I had been working on Munich when Incredible Hulk hit the theaters. And in the scenes where he wasn't a digital character jumping all around, I saw a warmth and a strength, and even a little tickle of fear behind his eyes, which I think humanizes people no matter what their jobs. And I was very determined that I was going to humanize the characters in the story. This is a human story. So Eric was my first choice from, I think, the outset.
I was in LA finishing off the movie Troy, and I got a phone call saying Stevena Spilberga would like to meet with you, and he told me of his intention to make this film and told me about the subject matter, which luckily I was familiar with. And at the end of it, I was kind of politely sitting there wondering what this had to do with myself, and I asked him what this had to do with me being there, and he said, I'd like you to play the role of Avner, who's going to be the lead character. So I was, shocked and surprised and thrilled and scared, of course. And from that moment on, I started researching and preparing for this, and about 18 months later, we started shooting.
I remember sitting with Steven and I asked him why he chose Eric for the part. And he said because when he met him the first time, he saw a great deal of humanity inside of him, and he knew that this character does really horrible things. And this humanity will help, I think, the audience identify with him.
I guess the simple rule of thumb for me was, having cast Eric Bana first to play Avner, was that none of the other team members could look like Eric Bana. As a matter of fact, none of the team members should look like each other. So I cast a band of extremely eclectic, not lookalikes. And their personalities ranged from Hans, who's very quiet throughout the entire story, to Steve, who's rather bombastic. And I think it was very important not just to find different looks, but to find different acting styles, different accents. If history is to be believed, Steve was South African in real life, and Hans was German in real life, and Carl was German, and Robert was French. And Avner was a Yeki Jew, meaning he was born in Germany, but he was raised in Israel.
Listen, you're doing reasonably well.
Reasonably?
You're spending a lot of money. Well, we expected that. I had one big scene with them that we shot where we meet up in a safe house in Frankfurt. A very big scene, and it took us 2 days to shoot this meal where we kind of catch up about halfway through the film with. And when we finished shooting it, we all went, wow, you never get to do scenes like that in movies anymore, where the barometer, the emotional temperature of all these different characters have so many different kind of viewpoints and personalities and levels of playfulness and mystery and enigma that gets drawn into conflict. So it was great to be able to play something that substantial with very fine performers.
It was really unique, obviously, because we have a Brit, an Irishman, a Frenchman, a German, and an Australian. And there were nights where we'd have a good drink and talk about world politics, and it would get quite heated in different areas, and we all really, really respected each other and are all very, very passionate about the countries we come from. So we had some really great conversations, and I'm hoping and assuming that camaraderie really comes across, because it was 100% genuine.
We have 11 Palestinian names. Each had a hand in planning Munich. You're going to kill them, 11 men, one by one. They're all in Europe now. You'll stay there as long as it takes. Europe only, not the Arab countries.
I have to say, the minute we realized this movie was going to take place in the 70s, that was the good news and the bad news, because I think a lot of us, certainly who, were growing up in the 70s, we realized that there's aspects of that period that were a little, they were unattractive, let's put it that way. They were just, awkward fashion and hair and all that kind of thing. And if it's not done right, it can look like a costume. And the 70s in Europe was actually quite different than the United States. And it comes through in a very understated, realistic way, because Steven kept emphasizing how realistic he wanted the movie to look.
When I first started the movie, the idea that Steven wanted to pursue was literally going to the real locations where some of these events happened, some of the assassinations and the killings, as well as Munich, the Olympic Village. None of those places proved to be places that we could actually go and film for a wide variety of reasons. And so we really began looking at a way of making the movie that would allow us the maximum use of a few locations, that we would make them into 14 different countries, which is why we picked Malta and Budapest primarily to film in.
We kind of went to these different countries and used them as Hollywood backlots. Malta substitutes for, Cyprus, Nicosia. It's Athens, Greece. Part of it is Rome, Italy.
While Zaid is here, in Rome.
It's certainly Tel Aviv in Israel.
Who kills the targets?
You do. Who else?
Malta is Beirut, Lebanon.
And action!
Malta served, many purposes. Budapest, on the other hand, was truly a backlot. By walking 2 blocks, the architecture changed from Romanesque to Parisian. And then you go back 3 or 4 blocks, you find yourself in London, England. And we added a couple of those double-decker red buses. But aside from that, I think Budapest was our most successful country in finding a variety of international looks.
As it turned out, by going to Malta and to Budapest and then making those into the various locations, we found a way to unify an impressionistic look of that era. And then that starts to segue, I think, hopefully into the theme of the entire production design of the movie, which is everybody seeking a home.
Living human beings are being held prisoner.
It's about the nations and the peoples, and then specifically the people that we follow, how they set up all these homes everywhere that they go, whether it's these safe houses that they go to, or trying, in Avner's case, to actually create a home, both in Israel and finally in Brooklyn.
Avner!
There's something that happens to a film as a family and as a unit shooting on location as opposed to being on a soundstage somewhere. That has a very, very tangible and visceral effect, which I love. It's my favourite way to work. You're in countries that have experienced incredible history themselves, and I think that always affects you. And visually it was never forced or never fake. You were always somewhere that was legitimately 500 years old, or at least a few hundred years old. And you know, whilst we cheated a few locations, but the architecture was never cheated and things were always real, and it's great.
In Budapest, there are really very little soundstage facilities, and the ones that are there were being used, so we had to use a ice skating rink that was not being used as a place to build our sets. And so we commissioned some of the local set building companies to do various sets for us. And so they came in and did the actual building on the Frankfurt Safe House and also the Munich apartment, which is a set.
A man with a stocking mask on his face. Weird.
But some of the things we just couldn't get in those places.
I wanted some kind of iconography in the movie, so I bought a couple of days to go to Paris to shoot around the Eiffel Tower and some cafes and some streets, because I didn't want the audience to be looking in the background searching for, is that really Paris? Is that really Germany? Is that really London? So I thought I could kind of throw everybody off by actually going to one of those countries and shooting there.
You can call me Louis.
We also had no way of getting a French farmhouse in Hungary. We finally went back to a place that we had seen on the first scout in 2004 outside of Paris, where we could find a kind of a compound where this little bit of a godfather type of figure that actually is in a sense pulling some of the strings as far as making the connections for this group and how they're going to find the people to assassinate.
We don't work with governments.
Louis said,
But you did what you did because you have to feed your family?
In the quest to find a home, Avner moves his wife and new baby to Brooklyn, which is like a new frontier, a place that he can actually then try to start a new life and leave everything that he's just been through behind him. And of course it follows him to some degree, and it's really not enough just to move to America, but it's interesting that we couldn't really replicate that in any other place. You had to go to New York and you had to go to Brooklyn in order to make that stand out and be something that you understood in the movie was different than all these other European locations that we'd been in, and that the light and the whole sense of what it would be to be there was somehow out of the battlefield, at least momentarily, of course, until our era.
This is Peter. Do you have something to report to us from where you are?
I mainly looked at old news footage of what the 70s really looked like, and that really informed Joanna Johnson and Rick Carter and all of us in how to really, you know, make this as authentic to the 70s, early 70s, as we possibly could.
Joanna Johnson, the costume designer, had to do a tremendous amount of work to create not only the look of the era in one place or two places, but 14 places. 14 different types of versions of the early 1970s.
Steven's brief was he just wanted it to look, you know, completely real and believable, and it was a time in history that he remembered as a style, but he just wanted it not draw attention to itself as regards costumes. It would just pass before you.
The costumes that Joanna has done, they're remarkable because she's not defined people just who they are, it's about sort of how they think. as well, not just about what they say, how they think.
It's strange, isn't it, to think of oneself as an assassin?
Think of yourself as something else then.
The hero 5 men, the characterizations in the book of Vengeance, they gave a very, very nice short list of things for me to draw on about how they were as people. And from that, then I, made their sort of look in their clothes and defined them away from each other, so they had their own identity.
I was really excited when I met with Joanna Johnson, the costume designer, and she ran through her ideas, and I mean, everything she chose was just brilliant.
Avner? Yes, we're going to Jerusalem, getting it.
So Avner comes out of Israel, so when he comes out, he starts very, very warm. He's out of the military, so he's got a precision about him. He's very disciplined, he'd never want to draw attention to himself. So he's sort of low-key, but he looks very nice.
I like neat, durable men.
You like having the son of a hero around.
And as he goes through the mission, that order in his clothes starts to break out. So when he's in Northern Europe and he's really starting to lose it, he becomes much cooler. And then he takes on the mantle of being in a modern world, and he embraces the denim culture, first of all, which is also cool and modern. And also I thought it was a sort of slight homage to Steve. I felt that they had a really close bond at the end, being the sole survivors.
Are you sure it's him, Avner?
It seems to me the way Steven's approaching it, the way he's filming things, and a lot of reflections, a lot of styles which maybe you've seen in films of the era, which I've always found incredibly stylish anyway. I mean, it's one of my favorite periods of movie making.
I keep talking. Ancora. Keep talking.
There were certain tools of the trade. Filmmakers used the zoom lens quite a lot in the 70s, and I decided, because I don't often use the zoom lens on many of my films, but I decided to probably use the zoom lens on this more than I've ever used it before in any film I've ever directed, because that was harkened back to the era where rather than dolly the camera forward, you just sort of reached out with the lens, which also gives you a sense of documentary. It gives you a sense of being there. And that turned out to be a wonderful technique to make you feel like you were not just a part of the 70s, but you were a part of an actual experience occurring right before your eyes.
What I usually do before we start the principal photography, I go and do extensive tests, photographic tests. Frequently, I will go to the location that we may photograph the movie. I went to Paris in 2004 and started experimenting with various color schemes, with various filters, lenses, and actually I shot in one location that we ended up photographing for Munich. I went to the lab, I manipulated the negative in the lab through photochemical processes, and then I made a little presentation to Steven. Basically, we were thinking of maybe pulling a little bit of the color out at certain scenes and introducing more colors at other scenes.
A little torture, and you'll see how nice they are.
Janusz actually had a different color for every country. He had a different palette for every country. It was actually very difficult for Janusz because we wanted to do something original to our story, and Janusz found ways of using bleach bypass in certain countries by actually pulling colors out of the sky, making the actual blue sky in Paris bluer than, let's say, it is in Malta. And he really worked hard to give each country a different color character.
Paris has different color scheme than Rome. Munich feels a little bit different because of the light and color. So those are very subtle differences, but yet each of those particular countries has its own individuality. Because it's a suspense movie, it was also very, very easy to realize for cinematographer and for director, that creates great opportunity to stage the scenes in a very unusual way. For example, you will see that many scenes take place in the cars, simply because we're looking at hunters following the prey. So that creates a certain sense of suspense. We're using a lot of reflections, where you're seeing at people reflected in the cars, you're seeing people reflected in the glass, you're seeing people appearing from around the corners and disappearing behind the corners, simply because it's a suspense. The way Steven created certain scenes are just really amazing, because you see 3 shots and basically they convey the whole suspense, and he's using zoom, he's using extensive blocking. He's a very skillful director when it comes to camera and when in terms of creating the whole visual world just through camera.
We pull back. Oh, it'll be two zooms. We pull back just for a close-up. He turns into the close-up. He says, do it. Then we pull back a second time and focus to him, and he's got the box, and then we make this move here. We come right around like this to here, and bang, it doesn't work.
Cinematically, I just find it so dynamic, and it just was always serving our performances.
Am I being hunted?
And I just feel like we were so well supported by the visuals and by what Janusz and Stephen were doing. And a lot of it's done with wardrobe, with Joanna Johnson, the costume designer, and Ricardo, the production designer. I mean, it's just unbelievable.
And cut. Beautiful. The project came to me by way of Kathy Kennedy and Barry Mendel, who just started developing it based on a book written in the early 80s by George Jonas called Vengeance. And the story just was, you know, one of the most compelling dramas and made an indelible impression on me. When we decided we wanted to tell this story, we turned to the most credible account we could find. And in fact, the only account that offers an extensive history of Israel's covert response to Munich, that looks at the mechanics of assassination, was George Jonas's book, which has, by the way, been in print since 1984, and it's never been discredited. It's been attacked by various people, by ex-Mossad agents and even one of the Black September terrorists, but being attacked isn't the same as being discredited. Plus, we did our own research, and I'm very comfortable with having used the book as a source. The operation that we're describing in our film was a completely covert operation. We know it took place. We know the people we describe in the film were killed as part of the operation. And until secret files get opened up, the details of the hit squads, this is going to remain obscure, and that's where imagination and filmmaking can really step in.
Are we on or off?
Although there's a couple of facts that are indisputable. One is that the athletes were massacred in Munich. And number two, Golda Meir made her decision to go after those responsible for killing the athletes. And three, a significant number of those who were thought responsible were killed. And those are indisputable facts. And camera, action. The book Vengeance, as I've said, if it was an historical novel, I would still want to make a film based on it because the story is so ultimately compelling. The drama is so compelling. And there are some very interesting lessons that emerge from this story. This is not a documentary. It's not made to be a documentary. It's a story based on something that actually happened in history. And it's not an effort to do everything and to be a crisp portrayal of exactly what happened, because even in George Jonas's book, not everything is made crystal clear.
We're Jews, Avner. We're supposed to be righteous. That's a beautiful thing. That's Jewish. That's what I knew. That's what I was taught.
You should make no mistake that I am not attacking Israel with this film. In no way, shape, or form am I doing that. This is a very, very tough subject, and we've decided to approach it honestly and unsparingly. This film is an attempt to look at policies Israel shares with the rest of the world and to understand why a country feels its best defense against a certain kind of violence is counter-violence. And we try to understand this as filmmakers through empathy, because that's what you do. You extend empathy in every single direction because you can't understand the human motivation without empathy. This movie is not an argument for non-response. And on the contrary, what this movie is showing is that a response that may be the right response is still one that confronts you with some very difficult issues. And when we have to respond to terror today, what's relevant is the need to go through a careful process, not to paralyze ourselves and not to prevent us from acting, but to try and ensure that the results that we produce are the ones that we really intend. I mean, it's the unintended, results that are probably some of the worst and that are ultimately going to really bedevil us.
Did we accomplish anything at all? Every man we killed has been replaced by worse.
Why cut my fingernails? They'll grow back.
Did we kill to replace the terrorist leadership or the Palestinian leadership? You tell me what we've done.
What you see in this movie is not an attempt to answer should there be targeted killings or not. What I'm doing with this movie is highlighting some of the dilemmas and highlighting some of the issues that need to be discussed. I'm not trying to answer them, but the movie, in a sense, apart from being a human drama which explores what these guys went through, will hopefully stir that discussion.
Good afternoon. I'm Jim McKay speaking to you live at this moment from ABC headquarters just outside the Olympic Village in Munich, West Germany. The peace of what have been called the Serene Olympics was shattered just before dawn this morning, about 5 o'clock, when Arab terrorists armed with submachine guns, faces blackened, a couple of them disguised as guards or as trash men in the Olympic Village, climbed the fence, went to the headquarters of the Israeli team, and immediately killed one man, Moshe Weinberg, a coach, 2 shots in the head, 1 in the stomach. They've been holding 14 others hostage since then, and the latest report is that 1 more has been killed.
Like all of us, we kind of sometimes remember where we were when Kennedy was assassinated, and in the case of the 1972 Summer Olympics, with the kidnapping and then murder of the Israeli team, members of the Israeli team, I certainly remember exactly where I was, the house I was living in, the television set I was watching it on, and how I was watching, like everybody else, wide world of sports when this incident took place, and just watched TV until its tragic conclusion.
The historical facts are that on September 5th in 1972, a group of Palestinian terrorists, or Fedayeen, went into the Olympics Village in Munich and took Israeli athletes hostage. And then over the course of a long day, during which the Germans tried with a kind of remarkable degree of ineptitude to negotiate the release of the hostages, and Golda Meir's government in Israel announced that it was going to stick to Israel's policy of complete non-negotiation with terrorism. The situation deteriorated. The Fedayeen, they were originally asking for the release of 200 Palestinian prisoners held in Israeli prisons, but eventually they wanted to just get away with the hostages. And there's some debate that possibly they intended to let everyone go. There was a terrible firefight on the runway at Fürstenfeldbruck, which is a military airport outside of Munich, and during the course of the firefight, all the athletes were killed, and most of the Fedayeen, 3 were captured.
I was 25 and I've somehow finished my studies. I was at the theater then, started being at the theater, and West Germany at least was something which was quite, I wouldn't say it was in order, but with the student movement, there were a sort of uprising, but that was an uprising which was a sort of necessity. I would call it even a sort of becoming a self-awareness of Germany through his new generation. And there was a revolt against the Nazi past, and the first time they really could speak about the past. And Munich was an event that came from the outside, like a meteorite. It fell into that country. We were suddenly aware that all this theater of peaceful Olympic Games was a stage for a dark play and a horrible play.
I was 21 at the time. Living in Australia, and it's an event that took on a lot of symbolic power because it was a major thing for the Israeli athletes team to be back in Germany. And at that stage, it's only 27 years since the end of the war. And for the outcome of that event to be so devastating, I think it resonated across the planet.
In 72, I was in the army. I was in an elite unit of the Israeli army. I was a team commander in an ambush on the Jordanian border. I listened to the event through the communication. I could turn the button and hear the radio. And I remember it very well because when it happened, I got so mad. I took the guy off the machine gun. I said myself, I said, tonight I want to kill. It was the only night in my life that I really wanted to kill. Nothing happened, nobody came. But I spent all night, I sat on the machine guns myself.
They gave a deadline first of noon, then they said 1 o'clock, then they said 5 o'clock, then they changed it back to 3, and finally to 5.
I vividly remember the events at Munich. I was in my first year of college, and when this event began to unfold, I think the most shocking thing was when there was this dilemma as to whether or not the games should go on or whether they should be stopped. And I think because no one had experienced something like this unfolding on television, there was a lot of reluctance about what exactly to do. And that's, I think, what I remember almost more than anything.
That outrageous idea to continue the games. That was outrageous to me because of the sheer bloodshed that happened and had happened before the eyes of the world, on the television eyes and the eyes of the whole world, to go on, say, as if nothing had happened. Just let go on with the games.
The Munich Olympics massacre was enormously successful for the Palestinians. It made people frightened of them and made people think of them as being, you know, sort of bad and ruthless and bloodthirsty, but it also made people think about Palestinians for the first time. This is the world's largest refugee population. They've been living in refugee camps and in really desperate circumstances, and the world for the first time really started to see this as an ongoing problem that needed to be resolved.
When I lived in refugee camp, you have nothing. Really, there is nothing. I mean, even water is really hard to get. Some people take shower with salt water from the sea. Food is also a problem. But I don't know, you grew up with this, the stories your grandfather and your parents tell you about how it was when they were living in Palestine, and how that they have a huge house and they had land and they had a decent life. So I understand him, but you can't change it like this. I mean, and you can't get back Palestine when you do something like this. Nobody will support you. Violence causes more violence, so this is not the way.
After the ceremony, the surviving team saw the coffins of their fallen comrades.
In Israel,
onto an airplane.
this event was a total trauma. It was a national trauma. It was the kind of event that was searing in its impact and required Israel to respond, because not to respond was to send the message that the Israelis were in doubt about their own future. We doubt whether we can survive. We're not prepared to take you on. So it was necessary to understand the psychology of the Israelis, which was, we're rejected by these people. We're rejected in the region by these people. This is proof that they're determined to ensure that they'll destroy us, and maybe to know that we're not going away. We're going to be here. And if they think they can impose this on us, we will impose a price on them that's worse.
Ambushed and slaughtered again. Tell me what law protects people like these. Today I'm hearing with new ears.
Action! And all of a sudden, all this glass hits the ground, and then the gun comes down, and we see the gun, the silencer. Then we come, we dolly a bit, he unscrews the silencer. Now Carl gets in, right, I got you. He gets in, and Steve gets in with a 3-shot. But this is I mean, every movie, I just try to mind the opportunities. You know, every movie is exciting because they kind of tell me what it needs. The movie informs me. I've said this before, but when I get a script in a genre that I'm not accustomed to, wow, it's like taking an amazing course, I guess. I become fully, totally immersed in that subject matter, and that's so exciting for me. And this was a very exciting era, but a very painful shoot, because it was very painful to tell the story. He just starts to come down. Look at his eyes there.
You know, I think Steven's always shown himself as being a remarkable director with actors, and I think actors obviously respect him. I think he's always looking for something fresh and original when he's asking for a certain kind of performance. And in this case, we had so many different scenes, and requirements for the actors. They were coming in, some of them for 2 or 3 days at a time, and that was it. So there was a high energy operating all the time on the set.
Why do I understand you better in Greek than in English? What is this?
Literally the first day of shooting, he arrived in the morning and we were shooting that evening. And it was a big, long shot. It was very, very complicated. And he sort of turned to me and just said, you know, just dive in at the deep end. I'm like, okay.
This one is a much more intuitional movie. Nothing was really preconceived in terms of the director's preparation. Nothing was really preconceived in terms of my preparation. Yes, him and I, we have to do some homework, and you know that certain things will happen, and you know the story you want to tell. So it was very interesting to see him, watch him discovering the movie on the set, realizing the complexity of the scene as the scene was being rehearsed, and trying to figure out how is he going to attack this particular scene.
Steven works fast because he's creating at that pace, and that's the way he is. Creating in the moment is so important to him that that's what he's come down to refining as a process as he's aged. He no longer storyboards everything, although on War of the Worlds he would previs lots of things. But essentially, in this movie, he was coming into each location with a kind of open mind of what he would get out of it. And he has said over and over again to me that he feels like that's when he's doing his best work, because he really feels that most of the time his first choices are his best. And probably if he had more time, he wouldn't be able to do it any differently anyway.
When we started the movie, the production schedule was 71 days, but we shot it in 68.
133, Victor, take 2.
The way Steven shoots, it turns acting into athletics, especially in this film. The complicated camera moves, the handheld stuff, it's so imperative for the focus puller, for the camera operator, for the dolly grip, for the actor, for everyone to be so in sync that there are times where at the end of a take you wanted to give each other a hug and a high five because you did it.
Now we're wide here, and the wife gets pushed away by the guy.
I think much like Private Ryan and Schindler's List, Steven approached this movie very realistically. That's what he wanted to do more than anything, to try to capture what might have really happened. He didn't want to give this a kind of glossy Hollywood look to it. He didn't want to have each shot so pre-planned and each scene so overly rehearsed that I think it brings an energy to the movie that makes you feel like you are dropping into these moments as they might have happened.
Stop! Stop!
Supposedly, there was a moment where Avner wound up sharing a safe house by himself with a group of people from one of the Palestinian groups. And I sort of thought that it would be a really interesting moment to, if they all wound up in the same place together, to actually have Avner and one of these guys have a talk.
You can't take back a country you never had.
You sound like a Jew.
Fuck you. I'm the voice inside your head telling you what you already know.
It felt when we were filming it, and I think it's always felt in the script, Steven's referred to it a number of times, as being a kind of an important moment to really sort of quiet everything down and just let you listen to this very simple exchange.
You kill Jews and the world feels bad for them and thinks you are animals.
Yes, but then the world will see how they've made us into animals.
There is a subliminal marking of the places where murder happens with the color red in this movie. It's not absolutely consistent everywhere, but there is the presence of red throughout the movie, just as a reminder, I suppose, subliminally of the level that this is really about, which is the spilling of blood. And it's ultimately, I suppose, what runs through the movie. If some movies have water running through, this one has blood.
There were moments that we were shooting where I knew, based on research, that what we were doing was totally real. And the set would always feel different that day. And you know, it was odd. You would meet the actor who was playing the character that your character was about to kill, and you'd be having a great conversation and having a really enjoying each other's company. And I would always, it sounds like a joke, but it's not, I would always make a point of really wanting to meet and get to know the person I was about to kill as an actor and as a character. And it's always a weird feeling. It definitely is, and it has a very big effect. And then there are some really incredible moments. The scene between myself and Alchir on the balcony was really haunting, even just as an actor to do. You know, I remember when I read it, I remember thinking, oh my God, imagine being out on that balcony and talking to this person whom you're about to blow up. Well, to shoot it is equally as, you know, disturbing and weird. But I think one of the most beautiful deaths in the film is the death of Hans. And we shot that in Budapest on the Danube there, and as we're approaching his body and we don't know that he's yet dead, the lights go out on the bridge and on the river, which was completely unplanned as it was approaching sunup. It actually adds to the scene. It's really kind of, I remember it was spooky when we did it. But it's such an incredibly powerful visual of him sitting there like a statue. It's like something you'd see in Central Park. And then you just have the two characters sit down next to him in that shot of the three of them from behind. I mean, that to me was one of the most moving parts of the film.
I initially did not want to recreate the Munich event. I wanted to just rely on the existing documentary footage, but then I felt that there needed to certainly be a constant reminder of what this story is hinging on, lest we forget. So for me, it was very important to continue to remind the audience and these characters, because especially Avner, who sort of replays the experience several times throughout the course of the story.
We realized we were getting close to the day that we were going to start filming the Munich Games massacre. And it was like suddenly switching gears and making a new movie. It was really hard to film, but it was also really transformative for everybody. We all felt that there was something tremendously significant that we were doing, and that in a certain sense, after filming a huge part of the film, we were now making the heart of the movie.
I think there was a little uncomfortableness at the beginning, especially the fears of the actors playing Arabs. They didn't want to be seen as people who actually, you know, felt the same way that the characters that they were portraying. And but pretty quickly we just became very comfortable with each other, and that first week of rehearsal was just a lot of talking and a lot of everyone just trying to sense out everybody else and trying to get a good sense of the story.
What's very powerful for me was that one of the actors that portrayed one of the Olympians that got murdered was an actual son.
Guri Weinberg played Moshe Weinberg, one of the coaches.
The idea of actually walking through the footsteps of my dad and what he went through was so intriguing to me, because, you know, when you hear the stories, it's all about tidbits, so it doesn't all make sense. So when you walk through it, it sort of makes everything real, you know? And I really understood exactly what he went through as much as I could, you know?
He's the bravest person on this film, and we connected because I lost my father at the age of 9 by gunfire, and so I connected with Guri right away, and so the shooting of that scene was harder for me than my own death scene. And I even told him the day before we started shooting of that scene, I said, if you need anything from me, you know, like when we're shooting, just, you know, let me know. And he's like, no, he's like, you know, just do whatever you have to do. You know, we're both actors. He's been very professional about it, which is amazing.
There was one thing I always said on the set. If the world could actually see the Israeli actors and the Arab actors together, there wouldn't be any more problems in the world. It was the most amazing thing that I have ever experienced. I've gotten more support from the Arab actors than I've ever gotten regarding this story.
It was a very emotional catharsis, I think, for both the Arab actors playing Palestinians and the Israelis playing the Israeli members of the team. Very, very hard for everybody. And so I wasn't thinking so much of technique, I was just thinking about holding my cast together and keeping everybody on an even keel, because it was hard. It was a rugged couple of weeks.
By the end of the film, I felt very much like, I felt like him all the way through, but it was almost in sync. I mean, by the end, We were shooting pretty much the end of the movie at the end of the shoot, and by then I just felt like I looked. I mean, I just felt very similar to the character. You end up taking on a lot of the character's state of mind. I mean, I remember one night coming home from work and cursing my makeup artist for not having removed all my makeup. And I washed my face and wiped it with a special makeup remover, and there was nothing on it. And then it suddenly dawned on me that the circles and rings that I was and the red that I was trying to remove from my face was mine.
You want your daughter to grow up in exile.
I want evidence.
And the end of the movie, where the scene between Jeffrey Rush's character and Avner, we've decided to photograph the scene on the shore of Jersey. We're actually looking at Manhattan from the other side, and the light is very kind of overcast, you know. And it's a very sad scene, because it's the scene where Avner's hoping and expecting some kind of reassurance that what he's done was the right thing. He's completely broken down. He's looking for guidance. He's looking for explanation why he's done what he's done, and he got nothing.
Did we kill to replace the terrorist leadership or the Palestinian leadership? You tell me what we've done.
You killed them for the sake of a country you now choose to abandon. The country your mother and father built, that you were born into. You killed them for Munich, for the future, for peace.
And towards the end of the scene, the camera is moving up and panning to the left, and you're seeing where the World Trade Center used to be. And it was so relevant to us at that moment in terms of the story.
Eventually, the Arab states will rise against Israel.
They're sworn to destroy it.
Unless we learn to act like them, we will never defeat them.
Every now and then you get to be involved in a story that you think is going to reach out, and maybe in some little way it might change the world a bit. And I think in this case, I don't think the movie's going to necessarily change the world, but I think it will highlight the debate. I think if it gets people all over the world at least engaged in the discussion, then I think we've succeeded.
I think the thrill for me in making this picture was that I got a chance to work from one of the greatest scripts I've ever worked with in my life. I mean, there have been many great scripts that I've been blessed with as a director. But this script is one of the best, one of the very, very best screenplays I've ever had the honor to translate. And that was one of the greatest thrills for me about making Munich.
Well, we are tragic men, butchers' hands, gentle souls.
You know why we're here?
We've responded. We sent 70 fighter jets.
Response no one heard.
Airstrikes on guerrilla training centers, that's a response.
No one notices what happens in the border camps. 60 Arabs dead, at least.
There's probably more speaking parts in this film than in any film I've ever directed, including Catch Me If You Can, which I believe had something like 150 speaking parts, and I believe this film may have 155 speaking parts. So, and when you have that many characters in a multi-layered story that spans a couple of years and many countries, it's just very important for me that the smallest character is as interesting as the most important character in the story. So I think I spent probably more time choosing amongst 10 to 20 different actors for a two-line role, because I felt that if the cast could coalesce and everybody was memorable in some fashion, that the film was going to celebrate performance, even though it's trying to portray a very painful, tragic part of our collective histories. I also wanted this to have an amazing ensemble in which to tell the story.
The casting team stretched all over the world, and but very importantly included Lucky Englander and Fritz Fleischhacker, who are a casting team who work out of Austria. And I worked with Steven before on Schindler's List, and they had worked incredibly hard and amassed an amazing and extraordinary archive, and also had worked right at the beginning of the process when no one knew anything about the film. And Terry Taylor, who has worked with Steven before, represented everything that was done out of America, specifically the amazing performances of Omar Metwali, who plays Ali in the film, and Lynn Cohen.
While the rest of the world is playing games, Olympic torches and brass bands and dead Jews in Germany. And the world couldn't care less.
Well, we provided Lynn Cohen with a lot of, documentary footage on, her speech patterns, Golda Meir's speech patterns. Certainly her look, her body style, the way she conducted herself. I noticed when I saw her speaking several times that she tended to rest her chin on her hand and gesture very close to the face, very close to the heart, and that was interesting for both myself and for Lynn.
Forget peace for now. We have to show them we're strong. She had such intelligence and wit and courage that I wanted to get all that in her, plus the simplicity. There was no artifice about this woman. She struggled for an education. Her family spoke nothing but Yiddish in her household. They didn't think after high school there's no reason for her to go on to have any more education. And she came from Milwaukee. She had such a journey in her life. And I fell in love with the woman.
Golda Meir was amazing shape. I mean, it was fantastic studying it. But Lynn is far tinier in physique than Golda Meir was. So we had to really build her up a lot with padding, and we went through the sort of procedure about twice before we got it right.
And then I had a death mask, taken to work with my face, because they wanted to build a nose and a chin and things for here. And we would start the process of trying to find this woman, physically and every other way.
Her sister died, but I think she didn't go to the athletes' funerals because some people are angry at her for not negotiating with the terrorists. Ephraim is part of the Israeli intelligence service, and he's the case officer who's in charge of selecting the team of people who are going to seek out the specific enemy in terms of the horrific events that took place during the Munich Olympics.
The beauty of working with someone like Steven, obviously, is the fact that he can literally get the people that he wants. And for me to work with Jeffrey, obviously, being a Melbourne boy such as myself, and we usually only meet on the Qantas flights from Los Angeles to Melbourne, so to be on the set together was great.
If these guys live, Israelis die, whatever doubts you have, Avner.
At one point I mentioned that I had a vision of Ephraim as somebody who looked a little bit like Arthur Miller, and I remember that Jeffrey loved that idea and immediately began a hunt for the right glasses. And it was Jeffrey's idea to actually act with lenses. Now, Jeffrey doesn't wear glasses like that, but he acted through lenses where he pretty much couldn't see Eric Bana or Daniel Craig when he was acting with them. Because often in movies, it's just glass. You don't see any distortion. There's no correction in the lenses. And he insisted on having a correction, and that kind of added somewhat of a myopic layer to his character.
Our civilians have been attacked by the Israelis day after day.
About all the years and years of Palestinian blood spilled by Israel. And who mourns for us?
You know Israel.
I was engaged as an actress first, but very quickly when I arrived there, in these 2 weeks I was in the beginning in Malta, it was decided that I become the technical advisor, in fact, on that period concerning Israel and Palestine. And then I just stayed the whole movie.
Without her, it would have been a different movie, really. And I think everybody understood that. That's why Steven kept her for the whole movie. She became the soul of the movie at some point. And she really is a symbol of what the movie is all about. There is no reason to make war because you're the same people.
They won't help when Egypt and Syria attack, even Jordan. Israel will cease to exist. My character is fictional, but I always start with research whenever I'm starting work on a new role, especially with something that's based on specific historical events. And, there was so much to learn about the time, about some of the ideologies and sort of ideas that were flying around that motivated the Palestinian resistance movement at that time.
Just make a conscious decision to turn your body like a duel. Okay.
And so you'll notice in the film that Ali has a key around his neck. What had happened basically in my research, I had read that many Palestinians who were exiled in 48 and then later in 67 had some kind of memento from their homes. And many didn't have time to grab anything. They left in such a rush that they would grab just their key because they fully expected to return, in a week or two. And so there are many Palestinians who have the key to their old homes. And I thought maybe Ali has the key to his father's house and wears it as a sort of reminder.
We want to be nations. Home is everything.
I'm going to go along with this until I don't. Do you understand me?
Islet somehow, just through her face and through her eyes and through her conviction, equaled Eric, and it's an extraordinary accomplishment. She's never been in a film outside of Israel. She's a working Israeli actress, and to have found her was a great fortune for us.
I was really surprised to discover that Steven is an enthusiastic man in a way that I don't think I met before. When he's working, he is so into what he's doing. He's completely determined and he's completely emotional towards that, and it's beautiful, I think. And also I discovered that he really likes things to be really fast. He doesn't want to have too many pause, which is, I think, really interesting, because then you don't have the time to think, you just react, and it's emotions. For me, it was really good.
We inhabit a world of intersecting secrecies. We live and die at the places where those secrecies meet.
Well, I had been looking for the right actor to play Papa. And then one night I was watching, again on television, because I've seen the movie many times, Day of the Jackal. And all of a sudden it just hit me, oh my God, Michael Lonsdale. So we approached him with this character, and it's a great character. He doesn't have a lot of screen time, but he dominates the movie when he's in the picture.
There's some opinion you should be punished for what happened in Beirut.
We didn't know so many would die.
I'm in business with death. Do you think I'm squeamish? Papa is somebody who lives in a big farm with a sort of family and friends and everything. And he has the possibility of selling important information about where the killers are. And we don't know how, but anyway, he does, and he asks a lot of money to do that. And at the same time, when Avner comes, he speaks with him, and then he understands that Avner is doing all this for his family. So that touches Papa.
Lie to me and you will find me abruptly unreachable and unhappy.
The depth to which we go through the cast and continue to find really interesting characters that are very deeply textured and well layered and beautifully performed, and Matthew Almeric is obviously one of them. And all the scenes that I have with Matthew, I mean, you really get the dynamic of these two guys and the dynamic of them together.
You're wondering if I'm French intelligence, or CIA, or KGB, or an agent with a profitable sideline in information. I could be anybody.
The thing is that nobody really knows who he is, huh? And we're always in Avner's eyes. So he always has a doubt about this guy, but he needs him to find information. And that's the funny part, the relationship between Avner and Louis, where they are always playing like cat and mouse. And I think Steven wanted to play on that. It goes, that's what the film is about. It's not only politics, it's about man, and what we have inside. And I think he's a great storyteller because he loves what is complex in the humankind.
Many people must want to kill you, Monsieur Stodge. But why would I do that? You pay better than anyone.
I want to say thank you very much to several actors who were saying goodbye to today. Mustafa, you were just great in all of your scenes for us today.
The film has assembled such a wide variety of talented people from all over the globe. Every day we would have people coming in, actors who with smaller roles, whether they be Israeli or Palestinian or from all these different countries. And I think that really, really permeated through the set. You always felt like you were working at the UN almost, every day. And everyone who came in and did a day's work or a week's work and had a big impact on their characters and the film.
That's him.
Evan, are you sure? You have to be sure.
That's him.
Post-production on this project started in production.
And cut.
So we needed to kind of organise ourselves and structure ourselves in a way that allowed Stephen to work very closely with Michael Kahn and to edit as they were shooting and to get materials to both Ben Burt, the sound designer, and to John Williams, composer. So 9 weeks of post-production is incredibly fast, if not the fastest I think I've ever seen.
To prepare for this film, I know we had to figure out a way to have complete access with Steven. I had a viewing machine in his hotel room at all times, and I had an editing room. And whenever I needed him, we ran footage. This system we set up 30 years ago on Close Encounters.
Hans, what are you doing? Hans, get back here!
I found the rhythm of this movie while I was shooting this movie, and the rhythm was either confirmed or denied to me in the editing room. When Michael would show me a picture and he would say to me, I think where this scene occurs in the story, you should pick up the pace a bit. So Michael really helped me with my pacing. Because we could just feel the pace in the editing room. I go from the set to the editing room. We have a little trailer that follows our sets, a little mobile trailer, and we're looking at the film and we're making notes, and that allowed me to make tremendous adjustments in how I was telling the story.
And cut!
It's very simple. I still cut on film because I love cutting on film. Just seeing my Khan with his little guillotine, cutting the picture and taking a piece of Scotch tape and taping the two sides together is just, to me, ambrosia.
To paraphrase Stephen, he loves the smell of it, the feel of it, the touch of it, and he likes to see what he's going to be showing on the screen. And we actually run film, so he'd be able to judge the timing and what it's going to look like. So Stephen likes it on film, and I don't object at all. It's sort of a lot of fun. A lot of fun being the only one left who's doing it. And it was a wonderful experience. Out of all of them, it was wonderful.
Stephen felt that the sound design on this movie was always extremely important. He brought on Ben Burt. Ben Burt did Raiders of the Lost Ark with us years ago.
Munich was a film which took place in the real world. It was based on historical information, and we were concerned with accuracy. So the first thing was to see if we could find recordings of just some of the basic things we needed: street ambiances, telephones, and in particular automobiles from that period. We did go to some libraries of sound which had been collected and recorded at that time, because by their very nature they would be chronologically correct. And then we organized recording expeditions to gather what we couldn't find, the period vehicles for the film, as well as some of the munitions, the Uzis and AK-47s.
The first person that got some of the footage was Ben Burt. He has a wonderful sense of what plays in a scene. If sound gets in the way, it doesn't get in the way. He got some wonderful backgrounds for us, some wonderful sounds.
The assassination of Zweiter was the first time the agents in the film went about having a mission and a target. And the idea was to make it very suspenseful. And the off-screen orchestra, which was part of the plan from the beginning, it was interesting because it was dissonant and unstructured, so it's unsettling. So I thought that the way to handle the sound was to magnify that empty world, so that you started out with all the natural street sounds, but once again, layers began to be stripped away until you got those lonely, echoey footsteps of him going down the hallway. Then you have the spooky elevator. Actually started with an actual elevator sound. It starts that way. But as it came down, I began to morph the sounds into a squeaky, clattery sound, which was actually some streetcars coming to a halt, a recording that I had. And it gets very quiet. If you want to make something loud in a film and you want to have impact, it's best to precede it with something very quiet, or a section of the film very quiet. So when those gunshots come on, you have the boom of those guns. Again, I recorded guns in a very echoey space. I did it in a parking garage. And as a final accent, Zuadir falls onto the packages and the liquid spills out.
Yes?
We tried to treat each explosion differently because there's a number of them in the film and I didn't want it to be redundant. Fortunately, each sequence allowed kind of a different approach, a different perspective with the sound design. When the bombing of Al-Chir takes place in his bed, to precede the blast, all the sound is taken down very low. So when Abner switches off the light, that click would seem, well, perhaps unusually loud. And then there's a moment of almost total silence, and then pow. And at the moment of the explosion, I put in a very high-pitched tone. The idea was this is like the ringing in your ears when something very loud happens suddenly. For me, it was a new territory of creative exploration. In terms of designing sound for it and being part of a team, a big team of very talented editors and mixers to put it together. And I felt like I was part of a string quartet, and dialogue, sound effects, ambience were in that mix, and we played as a little ensemble together to do something that was maybe classical in nature.
Well, you know, it's interesting because John was very tired by the time he got to this picture. He had done, in just the calendar year of 2005, he did episode 3 of Star Wars, he did War of the Worlds for me, he did Memoirs of a Gay Show, and he was just beginning Munich. So it was his 4th score in a single year. Even when Johnny was hungry 30 years ago, he didn't do 4 movies in 1 year. But he reached down deep and he pulled something wonderful out of his heart.
I think Stephen and I working together maybe 32 years, something like that. And Munich is, I think, less an entertainment film than it is the documentation, if you like, of really fairly recent history.
They're all gone.
The beginning of the film, of course, when Avner's watching the events on television, we hear Hatikva, which is, of course, the national anthem of Israel, which is really a beautiful tune.
People are weeping, tearing their clothes.
So we begin to hear Hatikva on television as it was played, and it gradually morphs imperceptibly into our orchestra playing Hatikva, and that continues through to the end of the scene.
What now?
Now we're going to have a baby.
So why'd they make you team leader?
Because he really knows how to cook a brisket.
Avner's theme, which also I've called Prayer for Peace. The first presentation of it is in a mealtime scene with the team, where it had the functioning of a bonding theme, really, when they were learning each other and becoming acquainted and developing the trust that they eventually needed to have to do their mission. And working backwards in the film, which I sometimes do, starting looking at more the end of the film, I wondered about what I should write and what music should accompany that scene between Avner and his wife and the scene in the tarmac. I think it may have been Stephen's idea originally to have a woman singing a kind of cantilena.
You got a wonderful singer, Lisbeth Scott, who had the most amazing, she made up all of her own words. Those words aren't Israeli, they're not Arab words, they're words she made up herself to John's music. And it was just a real, plea for peace, which I think is what Munich really is when you come to think of it. It's what I certainly intended from the outset, was for this to be a plea for peace.
Stephen and I have always had very eclectic sensibilities about stories, and we both seem to be interested in a lot of different things. And I can get as excited about making a very popular, audience-driven kind of movie, because it's fun, as I can about more serious, dramatic material. And I love the idea that he enjoys the process of going back and forth, and so do I.
This is the story of what people do under great stress, and it stirs some of the issues that we talk about today when confronting terror. And because I'm a filmmaker and not an historian, and I'm not a diplomat, I'm not trying to answer questions here, but I'm more interested in exploring what people go through when they have to deal with overwhelming circumstances. Because I was as riveted as everyone else was in September 1972 to what happened at the Munich Olympics. And here was an event that was riveting and appalling at the same time. And I think our film honors what happened to these athletes so that the memory of these athletes will never be lost.
A place on earth. We have a place on earth. At last.